so. We're starting a little later than anticipated, but that's because we decided to move to this room. It's a better setup for us.
Well, I don't think they'd all fit.
No, that's also a problem. The room we were scheduled in was kind of too small. So my name is Haldur Fannar, and I'm the CTO at CCP. And I'm joined by Phil Scott of NVIDIA. And we did a presentation here last year. And this is kind of a follow-up to that. It's a, we're going to be talking about things, graphics related to Eve. The presentation titled Visual Computing, and it's essentially stories from the edge. We're going to be talking about new things, exciting things that are happening in the world of graphics and in the world of Eve.
Yeah, we're trying to break the second album problem now, so bear with us.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to talk about is just where things are going. Right at the minute, you're looking at a GPU having about 1.4 billion transistors, which is an enormous amount of transistors on a GPU. And those are all baked down into a 0.65 nanometer process. And that enables us to do things like realistic lighting and, go beyond things like such as canned walk cycles, do more physically interactive things. But also do things like, complex per pixel things like, BRDFs and that sort of thing. So, we're going to dive deeper into that sort of thing and give you a better idea of where things are going.
Yeah. And I mean, if we look back, we feel we've actually come a long way. We had the major overhaul last year with the Trinity expansion, with the premium graphics, where, as you can see on the slides, we did quite a few things. And one thing there in particular, for instance, is that the animation on the ships are now entirely done on the GPU. And it's not only the turrets, for instance, which, to explain that better, essentially what has happened is that the logic of the turrets, the way that they actually aim at another ship, is entirely run on the GPU. So the GPU has been programmed to know how to operate the turrets, how to animate them, position them, orient them, and do everything that's related to them, which is pretty cool, which shows you just the things that you can actually do on your graphics card. The thing is also that, if I can get this here to switch, that we can do so much more with this. As you can see here, I just have the infested Dominics running here. And I just want to show you that this isn't just limited to turrets firing. You can do pretty much anything. So we foresee that ships in Eve actually will take on much more of a life of their own going forward. Not only the creepy infested Dominics, but you can see all kinds of intricate bits moving in the ships when they're flying or when they're firing or whatever. And essentially this ship is it's like a skinned character in a video game. So it essentially has bones inside of it that allows us to deform it and change it. It's kind of hard to see on the projector in this resolution, but even the eye up in the corner here is actually throbbing.
And from a content creation point of view, in the past when it was like, right, need to add a turret to a spaceship, the artists would say, right, we want to do this, we want to do that, and it was a hell of a problem to actually make a spaceship. And now essentially they make it in Maya and export it, and the game engine just takes it. It really speeds up the sort of progression of what can be built.
Yeah. So what we're trying to underscore here is that we put a lot of technology in place, and we're putting even more technology in place that will bring you a lot of exciting things in terms of visuals for Eve. So here's a little bit of a roadmap on what's going on. We need to renovate everything that's left out in the Trinity expansion. And this includes the effects when you're shooting at each other and getting blown up. The Trinity expansion essentially is, in a way, half done, the upgrade to premium content. We focused on the things that our players saw the most, ships, stations, and stargates, and got those upgraded. This was also a learning process for us to just understand what was involved in redoing all of these things in this immense detail. And but ever since we shipped the Trinity expansion, we've been building and we've been rebuilding everything else. So we have a lot of renovated content already that we're now working on and will be working on putting out in the game. There's also, for instance, the vastly improved particle systems that we have now, and we'll be showing you some of the stuff that we can do with those. There's mining in planetary rings is also a feature that's been much requested by our players, because our mining, back in the days when it launched, it was pretty cool to have a few floating rocks in space. But on today's hardware, we can do really cool things with instance-based rendering. I can take as an example, Pat Ragnar, one of the programmers that was working on the Wiz, the Walking in Stations project, did some instance-based rendering for the Slay game, which you can play. We then foresee that using that technology, we can actually start rendering asteroids. And we've done simple experiments where we just rendered boxes, but we were rendering hundreds and thousands of boxes, and it was running at really good frame rates. Of course, when we move this up to an asteroid, you're not going to get the same experience, but still, we're starting to see more than just a few rocks on the screen when you're actually mining, which will make mining fun.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it, space is a fairly empty place. I mean, that's why they call it space.
Yeah.
So you want to put things into it.
Yeah.
Makes a better game.
Exactly. And I mean, there's always been this discussion of the scene from Empire Strikes Back, the asteroid scenes in that movie, trying to get to that level where you have a lot of rocks on the screen and the ships flying in between the rocks. Up to this point, we haven't really been able to populate the screen with enough rocks to actually be able to deliver something like that. But that's actually what we're now working towards. The limits, yes.
So, I mean, looking at the limits, there's always limits in everything that you do. And we want to sort of give you an idea of what we're doing to actually improve things. Yeah. So, we'll break down the barriers of where we're going. Now, a PC at the minute is constrained by a number of things. Bandwidth is a major issue, right? And doing a lot of things to try and improve things which are constraining bandwidth. And then things like PCI Express, I mean, it isn't light speed, right? It has a finite speed of data transfer. So, and through that, you've got the GPU and the CPU and all these other peripherals talking across PCI Express.
Yeah, so basically you have these two powerful entities, the CPU and your GPU, but they really have problem talking. There's not a really big pipe between them. And so the question is, I mean, how do we deal with that? Also, how do we deal then with a situation like this, where you have a mid-range laptop having 128 megs of memory, and then an upper-range desktop breaking the gig barrier in terms of how much memory it has on the video card. It's a 10x difference, and the reality for us is that we want to deliver solutions that work for all of the players of EVE, not just the people that actually went out and bought the latest video card. We want to cater to those people, but we also want to cater to the other people that are trying to play on laptops. So that's actually where this immense computational power in the GPU helps a lot. As an example, in the Trinity expansion, we did GPU reconstruction of image data. So this is actually one of the channels in a normal map. And so what we did is that we actually put this in a compressed format, a DXT5 format, where this is an alpha channel. And then we can derive other channels for the normal by just using math on the GPU. And what's kind of exciting about that is that the GPU is so powerful that we can actually do this for every pixel, every frame, while you're just playing the game. So instead of actually storing the data, we're just recalculating and figure out what it's supposed to be all the time. And that actually is beneficial, because on a laptop, you have the GPU power to do that, but you don't have the memory to store all these textures and all this extra image data. We also did something even more crazy. We shared the data in texture channels. So what you're actually seeing here is that this is from a Galante station. This is the glass alpha channel for the station. It's kind of defining how see-through it is. But in the same image layer, you're seeing these little dots, which are actually glow pixels, which are the little glowing things on the station. And so once again, the GPU allows us to run different programs that interpret the data differently. So we're actually able to splice into the same channel different data. And I'm not going to go into the details, but I have a presentation as well in Jessica where I show the process of actually using the GPU to generate this texture. Because an artist, we didn't have our artists build textures like this. This is just crazy talk. This just blows your mind when you're trying to think about it. The same thing with the normal maps, they make no sense. Then we actually take all these layers and we splash it into one texture. If you look at that texture in Photoshop, it makes no sense to you. It looks like an alien transmission. So how do we then do this? What we actually do is we have the artists work on these independently where it makes sense. We tell them, make me a texture that just has the see-through attributes as the station and give that to me. Make me another texture that just has the glowy bits and give that to me. Then we have this offline process that takes care of splicing things together, reconstructing image data, and compressing the whole thing. And one thing that's really exciting also that we found in the Trinity expansion is that we use the GPU to help us with this, because this is intense computational work. And having something like CUDA, the special CUDA build of the NVIDIA texture tools, allowed us to speed up this process immensely. And it's actually a problem in today's games, is that the artwork is getting fatter and bigger because you want more detail. But then at the same time, we're having to do way more processing on it just so we can squeeze it down to something like a laptop. And being able to use the GPU actually to do the offline work is in my view, a pretty nifty thing.
But the texture tools themselves actually sped up by a factor of 10.
Yeah.
By using the GPU to do stuff for the GPU, which is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing, but
yeah. But it's pretty cool. I mean, because sometimes people wonder, you know, why would it even be beneficial to have like a multi-GPU or a multi-card setup in your computer? And I have to tell you, in those cases, it's really beneficial, because you can see a massive speed up. So, and we're actually going to be talking about that later here, how we're going to be re-architecting Eve to take advantage of these new GPUs and this new world order that we have in terms of graphics.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, hold on, what's this big-ass formula?
So this is something I was working on one night. I was thinking about the problem that we were delivering building textures for resolution of monitors like this or even bigger, where you're going above 2,000 pixels in one dimension and 2,000 pixels in the other dimension. So you're building textures that are 2048 by 2048. The problem is that when you run something like this can at the maximum do a 1280 by 800. So it goes without saying that my 2048 by 2048 pixel texture is way obese for this tiny laptop. And what it does, it wastes memory and it wastes performance. So I came up with this formula that I was working with for a while, which kind of tells you what size a texture should be in pixels in terms of how big the object is in world space. And so we started running this on our unit tests, on our artwork, and we saw quickly that there were some big offenders in some of our spaceships where we had put textures in that were way bigger than what they needed to. The other part with this equation is that it depends on the resolution that you're running at, what should be the actual target number. We, however, quickly found that, you know, a formula like this makes no sense to the artists. So we had to have some way of visualizing it. And that's where the GPU came in again. So we make this program to visualize texel density. And it's basically a color coding of the surface of your ship. So once you've textured it, we can tell you green is good, red is bad. And
red's very bad.
Yeah, red is very bad. And blue is kind of too good. And what that means is, you see how it's fuzzy here? It really means that the artist actually should have wasted a little bit more texture on here. It's starting to stretch and look smeared. Where it's red, that's where you're spending way too much.
I'm quite partial to green. Green's a good color.
Yeah. And we can see this here, if I can bring my laptop back to life, that there's a way to switch this, if I can get this screen to refresh. Let's see, let's just resize it. I wanted to show you just the tool in action, but it's going to be slightly difficult. Let's just drag this off here so it's not in my way. This actually, I claim, is what makes presentations fun when you're trying to run.
Yeah, because it worked yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
It definitely worked yesterday.
And now it's all broken. It worked this morning. That's why I should do all my presentations in the morning.
Yeah, or just video them.
Unfortunate that nobody is awake.
Holodeck hollow.
Yeah, exactly. The ultimate in horror. Let's see. So I was going to turn on the this view for my beloved Dominic's and just show you what it means. So really what you're seeing here is that I brought the Dominic's really close to the view, and you're starting to see how it's starting to go blue. And but there's still areas here which are red, and not surprisingly, the tentacles, these little arms down here are red, and they will actually stay red if I remember correctly. Let's see how to do this. Yeah, Even if I zoom in, they stay red. So it's obvious that on these little tentacles here, the artist was a really naughty artist and spent a lot of pixels. But what's interesting here also is that you see that, okay, it's green now, and to put things into perspective, if I were now to play this game at a smaller window, which many of you do when you're playing maybe multi-client or something like that, you see how more parts of the ship went red. And this really explains what I'm talking about. At this point, these textures are just way oversized for what your computer wants. So this is one thing that we're working hard on now to get in, which is essentially to adapt at runtime when you run the game. When we load the texture from disk, is to choose the size for you. This will help you on a laptop, and this will definitely help you when you're running multiple clients.
It'll definitely make the game run faster.
Yeah.
Because there's less bandwidth being used. Yeah, so
exactly.
it really is an important thing. And also for the high-end players. I mean, there are some high-end players who play on these cinema displays who are running at 2560 by 1600. Yeah. And you know, that's an enormous range to actually physically have to support between the laptop screen and the large cinema screens.
Yeah, exactly. And here's another thing that we're actually working now with NVIDIA on implementing a new version of this. So SSAO, it stands for Screen Space Ambient Occlusion, became kind of a buzzword around the game Crisis. So NVIDIA has developed a new version of this called HBAO.
Yeah, Horizon-based ambient occlusion.
They just had to change the acronym just to be difficult.
We wanted Event Horizon-based ambient occlusion.
Yeah. But
So I mean, the cool thing about this is it adds effectively implicit shadow where you wouldn't necessarily want to waste a lot of GPU time creating a physical shadow, or indeed using light maps, which is
exactly. And it's a great example there, because if you contrast this with currently what we have in the Trinity expansion, is we have light maps on some of the bigger ships. And so we're actually spending valuable texture resources to store these light maps. What's really cool about this stuff that we now have in walking stations is that this is generated at runtime. There's no texture involved. This is just a GPU figuring out where shadows should be and creating these soft shadows, which is really nice.
And what's even cooler about this is if you blow some of that shit up, the shadows change.
Exactly. It's not a static pre-computed thing like you have on the ships right now. And even cooler, this scales. The solution from NVIDIA actually scales pretty well, so you can dial in the quality. So on a laptop, you can go for less quality. On a really beefy machine, you can go for extreme quality.
And as we release new hardware, what will happen is you'll be able to dial the slider even higher to use some of that GPU time to get a much higher fidelity in what you're seeing. So Aldo's going to show you something really cool now. This is 5,000 and something by 1600.
Yeah. This is how everybody should play Eve.
Right.
So what is really cool about this, in my opinion, is that we have these new GPUs. They're extremely powerful, and we just need to find ways to do cool things with them. And this is one of the things you can definitely do. And what's really nice about this is that, to me, the scale and the size of the Stargate became very apparent to me once I started running in this view. The cool thing also is, I mean, right there, it's running at 150 frames per second. So this machine is just not sweating doing this.
Just to give you an idea, that's about 8 or 9 megapixels that it's rendering there.
Yeah, and this is using HDR, which, you know, on a laptop, of course, your laptop would actually explode if you tried to do this.
And if it didn't explode, you'd run out of battery in about 5 seconds.
Yeah, in 5 seconds. Out of juice. So it just kind of shows you both the exciting world we live in, but also the challenges we have. We have this on one end, and then we have this. But we, you know, at CCP, we still have this, you know, desire. We want to, we have one server, one world, where everybody plays together. And it's pretty important to us that when we release these updates and new things, that we have a way for this to work even on the lower end. Because it makes no sense for us to fracture the player base. So, multiple clients on a single machine. You might have seen this image on Facebook. But this is Snorri Sturluson, one of our senior graphics programmers. And he's running 10 clients on one machine. Now,
I want to see the keyboard to play that.
Now, of course, it's a beefy machine. I mean, it had dual 8800 GTX cards and quad core. But still, you can do this. I mean, the performance wasn't great, but the reason why we did this was we were working on certain issues in the engine that were hampering people from playing multiple clients. Now, the interesting story is that Eve wasn't really built for playing multiple clients on one computer. However, we found that there's a significant portion of our player base that likes to do this. So what we're working towards now is to embrace it and just roll with it. We haven't publicly announced that we're supporting multiple clients, but I can tell you we're spending a lot of time working on it and thinking about it. And so basically you might have read the comic from Scott McCloud, which is pretty good, which explains how Google Chrome works. And in their approach, they took entire processes and put them as different tabs inside of the browser. We are taking a similar approach, but changing it slightly, and sharing Trinity Audio and resource management, but having Python, Destiny, and game-specific thing run in different process threads. So what's really exciting about this is that it allows us to utilize the hardware that you have and the multi-GPU, and not pay the price of allocating a memory over and over again on the GPU, because, I mean, Phil can talk about how it's working today under the current operating system.
Yeah, I mean, the current operating system actually has its limits. Each GPU has its own memory. Yeah. So essentially, you're not sharing any resources. And this is true also, you know, of other types of systems for doing this as well. Then you end up with various other issues such as memory contention and that sort of thing. So where we're actually going to try and make these things speed up. I mean, you know, you can now buy GPUs which have got, you know, not just one graphics chip on a board, but it's got 2 graphics chips on a board. You also have situations where it's like, hold on, this motherboard supports that I can actually put 3 of those boards into a PC. So inevitably, if you've got 6 screens, I mean, I would imagine Eve players have got 6 screens.
Sure. It's a system requirement.
You know, I mean, you know, not so much the laptop players, but definitely the desktop players. You know, it's like players do play multiple clients, and if supported correctly, it'll make the experience absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, because I mean, it is kind of retarded if you think about it. That in this case, I mean, all the resources that you're seeing here, like the NeoCom and all these icons, they're being duplicated both in system memory and video memory for each and every client. So what I'm talking about is an architecture that solves this problem. Another problem you have in today's setup is that even in this case, Snorri has 2 GPUs in his box. He's not able to use them. He's only able to use one, really. And so we need to come up with a solution. I mean, because today you can buy these cards that have 2 GPUs inside the card, and then you can have 2 cards, maybe up to 3 cards. So you can have, well, you can go up to 8 GPUs in a machine. Yeah. And in that case, you know, it would be really great if he could run 8 clients and dedicate a GPU to each client.
And that's something that we're certainly working on to try and actually facilitate.
But I would never want to pay his power bills.
No. 8 gigawatts?
Yeah. So, so this is what we're talking about. We're now starting this project of redesigning the core inside of the graphics engine to be multiprocessor for GPU and CPU. And, you know, it's to enable things like that and to enable what Snorri was doing. And so we feel there are definitely exciting times ahead. I mean, last Game Developers Conference, there was a lot of discussion about how to really take advantage of the fact that people had now more than one GPU in their system. And I feel like with Eve, there's a unique opportunity because we have a significant portion of our player base that plays multiple clients.
So, I mean, you know, we already have this concept of multiple processors, right? You have multi-core PCs, you have dual-core, you have quad-core. You know, multi-threading helps an awful lot, right? But to take care of that, you have to think of things as a job scheduler rather than just saying this core does this and this core does that. You want to try and break things down. So you're sending little jobs off here and there, so you maximize the thing. Now, the downside of the sort of multi-core architecture is the fact that if one core is talking to a piece of memory, another one can't. So you have to design these things very, very carefully. And ultimately, it doesn't actually make PCI Express any faster. If you've got 2 cores trying to send things across the PCI Express, it's like a traffic jam. Not that I don't think there's even an Icelandic word for traffic jam, but you know,
really.
you don't.
You just get out of your car and walk.
Yeah, that's it. You know, so you know, as a result, you know, the rendering needs to change, right? And the GPU is very, very efficient at rendering. And it's also very, very efficient at other things as well. And for a lot of tasks, it's actually significantly more efficient due to the nature of the task.
Yeah, exactly. And
so,
I mean, yeah. And
so, I mean, Haldo's got some great screenshots here that actually exhibit
the concrete
this.
example of that. I mean, in the old, this old classic content chip, these little light glows are actually being entirely processed on the CPU. The CPU is deciding how big they're supposed to be because they flash. The CPU is even orienting them correctly so that once they get passed off the rendering, they look correct. In this new scheme on this premium content, these little glows are actually GPU programs. They run entirely on the GPU. The logic for them, how to flash, how to orient, what to do, it's all on the GPU. So what it means that in this case, you have over 20 light glows in the premium content that's just completely handled by the GPU. There's no stress on the CPU. But in this case, it's 20 little entities to process. And what's even sadder about that is that as ships recede into the distance, these light glows become bigger because that's really what our eye tends to perceive. You tend to see the little light sources, even if the ship and the detail of the ship is gone. So even in the case we're in a pretty big scene with a lot of ships, you will have all these little light glows going on. So the bad thing about classic content is that you can have hundreds, if not thousands, of these little guys going on and being simulated. Whereas in the premium content, it's entirely running on the GPU.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you would have got from that is the fact that as the spaceship got further away, it became infinitely more inefficient.
Yes, exactly.
So you want to keep the spaceships close.
Exactly. And here are the turrets that I spoke of earlier. Same thing there. I mean, in this old scheme, there's a lot of logic on the CPU on how to orient this little guy and make him aim. In the new scheme, this is just a program on the GPU.
And I mean, speaking of bandwidth, right? Now what happens is we say, okay, we want to shoot a gun up there, and effectively what happens is it does that. It does the animation, it does the whole process. Yeah. The way it used to be done, the CPU would do some work and then it would pass a bunch of jobs off to the GPU. Now what that yields is actually data compression. You're saying point a gun there and shoot, right? That's quite an easy thing to do. So it's describing what you want to do rather than actually sending all the instructions to do it.
So it's sending really high level information to the GPU, which is pretty cool. So let's see. So we're going to switch our attention a little bit to particle systems, see if I can make this actually work. View playlist. Repeat. Let's see if I can. So, the new energy vampire effect. So, yeah. So really, what's behind this and what's going on here? Let's switch back to the presentation. So, yeah, historically, particle systems have had to be stateless if they were in the GPU. What that means is that you can vary the initial conditions for the particle, but after that, the evolution of the particle is entirely deterministic. So there's no interaction. There's nothing really that can happen during the lifetime of the particle that's non-planned. You can't apply forces to it. You can't have them collide with each other. None of that is possible.
And you need that to actually make particles interesting, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so stateful on the GPU has been recently done through DirectX 9 and definitely doable with DirectX 10 through some hacks, pretty much. In DirectX 9, you write intermediary data to the texture that you then read back. But with CUDA from NVIDIA, this actually gets really interesting because the lines get blurry. You can write your particle system much more like a CPU program, just using C++ or C, and then you can compile it for CUDA. And you might have seen some examples from NVIDIA on smoke and other things where there actually is interaction. The smoke is forming and adapting to...
Yeah. So you can apply vortices and things like that. Yeah. Pretty much the sort of thing that you were seeing on the video, where you're applying forces, you're applying magnetic forces or tractor beams or you know whatever the case is. But it's the forces and the interaction that actually makes things like particles very, very, very interesting. And ultimately, it makes for better games.
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of the things that we really feel is the next frontier for us to address in EVE, because you know we built these really nice premium content spaceships. Now we need to make the effects kind of match the ships. And it's also interesting in that context that We would also like to have, now by introducing these new effects, we of course also want these effects to scale better. For people that are really involved in fleet battles, they usually just turn off the effects entirely. And this is because the effect system itself does not have any mechanism for controlling how much it's consuming of resources from your machine. If you have 50 ships firing on your screen, then that's what you see. If you have 50 ships exploding on your screen, then that's what you see. That's not really how these things should be built. There has to be a budget to how much they can take from you, and then it just scales down. Because normally what happens in scenes which are so congested, you won't actually notice that they were actually just explosion effects were maybe downgraded for some of the ships, and only the ships that were right in your face got the really nice explosion. And so that's a really important part also to what we're doing.
So, you know, we're talking about, you know, doing this sort of thing with CUDA. But, you know, CUDA is just a language, right? CUDA is a language that's designed for parallel processing. But there's also things like DirectX 11, which Microsoft have announced, and there's also things like OpenCL. CUDA is cool because there's CPU fallbacks, and also it runs on all the operating systems. So by doing it with CUDA, what will happen is it'll run on the Mac, it'll run on Windows, it'll run on the Linux version when the premium content comes to both of those platforms.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, what we're seeing is just this evolution where this visual computing now is being enabled on all of those platforms. So we don't feel like we're locking ourselves into a corner by taking this route. Because this is just, I mean, it's a revolution that's happening.
So, you know, we effectively have a supercomputer on your desktop, right? You have things like a GTX 260 and a 280, which have been out in the marketplace for about 6 months now. But you need something to tap into that power. And what you need is a programming model that supports parallel processing. You know, it needs to be simple to use, so which is why CUDA is effectively a C language for parallel processing. You know, and we program shaders now in a C language, so there is, you know, there's a commonality. The games are written mostly in C. You know, there's a commonality in the way that we do that. But ultimately, it's actually designed for parallel processing and large-scale visual computing.
Yeah, I've been teasing Phil that the 260 and the 280 are kind of a Trojan horse strategy for NVIDIA because, I mean, people bought the cards and they didn't understand why they were so big. But that's because, I mean, there's just all this additional hardware there to do general-purpose computing.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's pretty amazing. You can switch the card into this compute mode.
Yeah. So, I mean, with it being designed for parallel processing, why are we saying this? Well, for a start, on a 280, there's 240 threads, right? That's not 4 threads, that's 240. And, you know, a lot of games, I mean, I said it yesterday, a lot of games actually, if you've got a quad-core machine, you know, effectively a couple of the processors can go off and sunbathe for a while. You know, it's they're not in a situation. The application has to be physically written to take into account quad-core. Just because you buy a quad-core machine, you don't implicitly go 2 times faster. With a parallel processing language and with this amount of threads, you've got to keep them fed. So the way it works is you have smaller local chunks of memory per core, and then we run these cores very, very quickly, and it's really efficient for large data sets because you can segment those large data sets up and do an amount of processing on them.
Which is, I mean, if you go back to just looking at that energy vampire effect I was showing you, that's, you know, a typical example where you can really segment that into a couple of parallel slices and run them all at the same time.
So, as Haldor said, the GPU has effectively its bipolar personality. It's a graphics processor. It renders polygons and pixels, but it also has this compute mode, and it switches into this compute mode. And what we're not doing is hacking around with textures and things anymore. We are physically working in a C-like language on a piece of memory, just as a CPU would. Now, as I said, each of these stream processors actually contributes to a core. And there's n cores, right? It depends on how big a board you have, how much money you've spent. So what happens is it just gives a job. When that job's finished, it comes back, it gets another job. And that's actually a really efficient way of doing things, rather than just dedicating this huge Leviathan piece of code, go off into one core and do it. So it's this job scheduler model that I was talking about. And when you have multiple GPUs, it scales near enough perfectly because you just say, well, here's more cores, give us more jobs, right? So it actually works really good. One of the other things is the fact that to do that with CPU code, you would typically have to refactor an awful lot of code, which is exactly what you're having to do now with the engine architecture.
Exactly. So basically, I mean, the gist of it is that the way we write code for graphics is already in such a form that it's easy for these GPUs actually to split the work up amongst themselves and just run.
So, you know, how does it do it? I mean, I'll use the example of physics because that's quite pertinent at the moment. Back in late January, early February, we acquired a company called Aegea, and we acquired a technology called PhysX. And one of the first things we wanted to do as a proof of concept was to port that onto a GPU. So we took things like SPH particles. So SPH particles are complex interactive particles. You use them for doing things like pouring fluids, which is probably one of the most famous examples of doing it. But you can use that for things like smoke and dense things, right? But also to make particles more interesting, you want to apply force fields, magnetic forces, tractor beams is a good one. But then also things like complex mesh solving. So, you know, say if you had a big solar sail or something like that on a spacecraft, you could essentially shoot missiles through it, right? Which would be cool if it starts flapping around and tearing and everything. So, it's orders of magnitude faster than doing it on a CPU due to the nature of the task.
Exactly. So we're getting close to questions, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think we have actually much left. I think we'd rather just open it to, open it to questions.
Yeah.
Now it's going to be hard for me to see everything.
There's a microphone down here if somebody wants to run around.
The man with a plastic bottle.
You should do.
And actually, I forgot to fix something here. Let's see, Neocom. Move. See?
How could you forget that?
All right.
It should be on.
I thought it... Oh, there we go.
Okay.
All right. Now, you from NVIDIA have already expressed that you guys are going to be supporting fully natively the Linux operating system. And I know I'm probably the only one in the room, but some of us are really dedicated to fully, you know, getting premium graphics, getting it supported and running it on there. Is CCP really doing that? Because right now, the current client for Linux sucks.
Yeah. It's actually something that within the graphics group, there is, it's been growing a kind of a strong desire to support both Mac and Linux in a better way. We have a partner currently, Transgaming, where we've been trying to use an emulation solution, and we're now pushing forward to get premium graphics out underneath that solution. However, both of us, both Transgaming and us, see this as a partnership that we have in where we're trying to work out the kinks. And I would say that regardless of how that pans out, we're hoping to have premium graphics out by the end of this year for both Linux and Mac. I think that Eve is actually going to be improving a lot in terms of both how it supports Linux and Mac. Our other option, of course, would be to write a platform layer that would allow us to run OpenGL. The engine right now is entirely in DirectX. And yes, it so happens that most graphics programmers really love OpenGL, so I won't have a problem convincing my programmers to do it. So it's more of a question for the company if that is a strategy we want to adopt. I would say that we will solve this one way or another because we want to support both of those. And I have to say the Mac, of course, is a bigger platform for us than Linux, but it so happens that once you've supported the Mac with OpenGL, then Linux is kind of it's a slam dunk. So I have high hopes that things are only going to get better for you.
And I'm hassling the crap out of Haldor for a Mac version.
Yeah, he wants a Mac version. I hassle him back for the drivers, the NVIDIA drivers on Linux, right? So I mean, of course,
it's a two-way thing. It's a team thing.
It is.
Right?
I give and take. Yeah. So I mean, of course, that's also the other issue. When you have this huge install base on Windows, where people really cry out loud when something doesn't work perfectly in the driver, it's different in Linux and Mac. I would have to say though that in terms of drivers, the drivers on Linux are actually better than the drivers on the Mac. Yeah. And I think it's just because the Mac doesn't have that many applications that use 3D to the max. Other questions?
Yeah, I was over to your right.
Yes, somewhere over here.
I was reading The Art of Eve, and really early on you had ships taking damage during battle.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, with these new hardware abilities, is that coming back?
Yes, it is. We're already working out different methods to do this. So we want to come up with a solution that scales, a solution also that we can use to the new ships that we continue to put into the game. It so happens that I can talk about some of the ideas we already have. I mean, one thing that I think is pretty important that we put in is just that you see some sort of a scarring on the ship and, you know, burn marks and stuff like that. You can actually do that pretty well by using a cube mapping onto the ship, and that would work for all ships and would actually look pretty cool. And then on top of that, we're also now starting to investigate using slice planes to actually slice up your ship dynamically and blow it into smithereens. And some of this comes from, there was a trailer, Empyrean Age trailer, where we got a skilled effects artist to apply effects to the ships. And this was done because the ships looked great, but the effects in the engine really didn't do the battle justice. And we now have hired this person to work in-house, so he's working on visualizing these new effects for us. And of course, I mean, he's inspired by movies and the state-of-the-art that you see there, and he's pushing our programmers now to find ways to actually implement that using these new particle systems and this new technology that you have. So I'm saying stay tuned, because there's some pretty exciting stuff that's going to happen with ship damage.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Hi, my question is regarding the Alliance logos. When will we see them on the ships?
This was actually brought up just 3 weeks ago, because we had the plan to put them out in the Trinity expansion, and I should explain why they didn't make it out. The reason was that the method that was used to apply the Alliance logos was not a good method. It meant that you had to find a surface on the ship that was relatively flat and have the logo on there. And the problem with that was that a relatively flat surface area on a frigate was really small, and then a relatively flat surface on a really big ship was big. So it kind of was messy in the sense that you couldn't really see the logo unless you were looking at your ship in the hangar. And people felt like that was not good enough. It wasn't worth the effort, because it actually cost us both art resources and computational power to do this. So we went back to the drawing board, and one of the things that is being discussed now is to use a projection mapping to take the logo and actually just put it big, you know, in a big way on your ship, which is more like you see maybe crazy paint jobs on street racers and stuff like that. And I think that could look really cool, but of course we have to convince the art department that, you know, this, you know, pimping their rides is okay, you know, because, I mean, they have a vision for their ship, and then you come with your plaster your Alliance logo over the side, which I think is going to be awesome, but, you know, I need to get Auskil drunk, really drunk. We'll get it in.
And they'll want big-ass exhausts next.
Yeah, exactly. Ground effects. Yeah. Now we're talking. But yeah, I mean, this would be our first step in allowing kind of a modification to the ship. And I think would be a huge step forward. Because these ships now, with all the computational power and the possibilities you have in these graphics cards, I mean, it's just screaming out for us to do something like this. Next question?
How you doing?
Yeah,
Up
good.
here, up here.
Yeah, okay.
Last year I asked a question if you were going to add dynamic ambient lighting via the weapons, like the lasers coming past the ship, are they going to cast a light onto the ship? With the new atmospheric and ambient lighting technology that's coming in, is that going to be possible?
Yeah, I see. You're referring to the ambient occlusion and whether we could. Yeah, so the ambient occlusion would not do it for you, because that's physically placed objects that are occluding light. This is a light emitter that is affecting your spaceship. I think that we could do this, but it would not be through a lighting solution. It would be more actually using the particles that would be in that beam to create an effect on the ship. It is kind of a problematic thing to solve, actually, primarily just because of scalability. Because we're always concerned about putting in a feature that, you know, we can then only run in the case where there's a dogfight maybe between two ships. I would have to really work out how this would scale with the fleet fights. But I agree with you, though. I think visually it would actually look really cool, because what we have today, and maybe some people haven't noticed, is that when a turret fires, there is actually a light source that does kind of a muzzle flash right in front of the turret. Now, admittedly, some of these turrets were not edited or created in the perfect way, so some of them actually have the muzzle flash light inside of them, so you can't really see it. It's really bizarre. I shouldn't be talking about these defects, but they piss me off. And so I should keep talking about them until I get them fixed.
Well, we trade piss me off lists quite regularly.
Yeah,
so
exactly. So, but what I'm saying is that, it gives you this at least dynamic feeling when the turret is firing, you see some sort of a flash on the ship. And I agree with you, seeing something like that translate over to other ship would be cool. But to be perfectly honest, we have a really long list of things, and I think unfortunately this would be kind of low on the cool things that we want to do.
Just to put you in the picture, the ambient occlusion actually adds pockets of darkness rather than adding extra light into the scene. Yeah. So it effectively makes little dark corners and that sort of thing.
Next question.
Over here. To your...
Up there.
Hello?
Yeah.
Just a couple of quick questions. With the upcoming new effects, would that include possibly visible missile launchers on any ships?
Okay, this was actually also discussed, because personally, I think it would be really cool. The problem with it today is not a technological problem in the sense of knowing where to fire the missile from. The problem is with how the ships are built, because they weren't designed for this. It means that the art guys would have to go back and start retrofitting and even deforming and changing the ships. And I think that is the big problem right now. We have over 580 ships in the game, and so it's quite an undertaking to start fitting this, onto the ships that should have them. So that's kind of where that whole project is stuck right now, is trying to figure out how we could actually make that work. Next question.
There's one down there.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a question about the sensor booster. Would that be getting a change with the new effects? Because right now it's irritating.
Yeah. All.
Add it to the piss me off list.
Yeah. No. All of the effects are on the renovation list, and they're all so. We honestly don't know when we'll get to the end of the list, but we will start shipping out effects as soon as we can, and so we will, upgrade them all. But I can't promise when they're all going to be done. But yeah, I mean everything: trails, boosters, all of these things, shield effects, armor effects.
The main thing is actually having a system in place that overhauls the old system, so that there's an underlying technology which facilitates having these new things better.
Yeah. So currently we're a little bit at a hump where we're putting in the new particle system, working with the effects artists to figure out exactly what it is that they need. They then deliver the first effects, and we're doing it the same way we did it for the ships. We're focusing on the effects that you see the most, like warp in and warp out and jump in and jump out and those things. Do them first, and then we're gonna go down the whole list.
Don't forget blowing spaceships up.
Yeah, of course.
Don't forget that one.
That's the big thing.
I have a question about NOS, the new NOS effect you showed.
Yeah.
You said that it's not dynamic and it reacts to something.
Yes.
So if I have a tractor beam and this happened that both streams cross, that there would be some sort of effect for that?
Yeah, I mean that's cross.
I could say don't
of
cross
course
the streams,
you never cross the streams. But in the unfortunate event that this might happen, then yes, it is actually entirely possible. Because what's happening now is we're giving these particle systems all this intelligence to respond to the environment. So for the particle system itself, it's actually not that much of an extra burden to take into account the tractor beam. It's just an additional force to the calculation. But it's a cool idea. Questions? Any more? Are we maybe running out of time? Should we be thrown out? Do people want to ask more questions? Or okay, all right. We'll keep going until they throw us out. There's a quiz show after this, so it's not, we don't have to be out of here on the dot, I think. Okay?
Yeah, in line with the Alliance logos, is it possible for ships to be dynamically colored by the players? Like we see on the Brutix right now, there are small parts of blue, but in the texture they're actually gray. So why not allow players to assign colors to those pieces of the model?
Of the ship?
Yeah, of the texture.
Okay, so this is an excellent question. And so, and I could answer it with a really long answer, but I'm going to try to spare you from that one. But have you seen a game called Second Life? Okay.
No, they're playing EVE all the time.
It's all player-generated content, right? And then you compare it to EVE, how it looks, right? So what I'm trying to get at is that you need at least some sort of strong artistic vision to create a holistic, nice experience that everybody likes. Even if you really dig having your spaceship pink, a lot of people will find that to be an immersion breaker. That being said, though, I do think that we're starting down a path of allowing our players to modify the content by having an Alliance logo, and I'm seeing more stuff in that direction happening. But I'm just going to caution you that we're going to move very carefully into this direction, because we're very aware of not wanting to break the whole artistic vision of EVE, because, I mean, it looks really cool. Yeah, just you, okay. So this is, she's doing negotiation. You can hear it. She's saying, allow me to do just this tiny little thing. And what I'm saying is, yeah, that's actually what's going to happen pretty soon. I can't really talk about the details, but there's going to be more revealed at Fanfest tomorrow. We are kind of moving into that direction now. Because, I mean, let's just admit it. I mean, EVE is built by you. We build the technology. The game would be boring if it was just technology. It's you, the players, that make the game. So, of course, we want to give you tools. I mean, we've allowed you to create Alliance logos, Corp logos, stuff like that. You know, so we need to slowly let go of some of these restrictions that we have. And, yeah, so. All right?
Yo. Guys, hang on. I still have a question, though. Do you guys have any... over here, in front of you. Just to the right. Yeah. Do you guys have any timeline when you're going to be supporting SLI? Because I currently have to turn off my SLI because it doesn't run very well.
Yeah. Are you running it in a window?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter.
Do you run the game in full screen or window?
I've tried both, but it doesn't matter.
So we could do a minor patch to allow you to get benefits if you run full screen.
Yeah, it has to be in full screen.
Yeah.
Well, that would be nice. I have two monitors, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay. So, because I mean, that's one of our concerns right now. We get the feeling that most people play EVE in window, and then the SLI doesn't help you at all.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's good to hear from people like you, because, I mean, for us, it's all priorities. If we hear from the players that a lot of them have SLI and they would be willing to run in full screen, then we can make this small patch. Both Phil and I know what needs to get done. It's not
I would
a big
love
deal.
to take advantage of SLI, because right now I spent the money on the extra part and it's not really being used.
Yeah. I mean, you could get another situation where the content... say the CUDA stuff, like the particle systems and stuff, would be run on one GPU and speeding the game up
that's
that
definitely
way.
another way.
And that would allow you to run the window.
Yeah. And that would work in Windows. So that's definitely another way that we'll be able to take advantage of SLI. Use the extra card, exactly. And I mean, some of these things we discussed here are more like further looking, but some of it's actually going to be shipping sooner than you expect. Okay, we're done. Now I'm getting thrown off the stage.
Was the hook coming?
Yes.